Hey y'all, today I'm going to be talking about the gift of discernment and exercising that gift. And it's also kind of going to be like a lesson on testing if it's the Spirit of God. Testing, we hear like people say like test the Spirit. Well, I'm going to go through some points that will help you consider if it's God speaking to you, or if someone else is saying God said, are they really hearing from God or not? This is really important because a lot of people, I feel like with us Christians, the division is half people who don't think that God speaks at all, and then half people who think God is saying everything all the time and just to them. There's very few people like in the middle who are actually and consistently hearing from God, and that's a problem, because as believers, as children of God, we have the right, actually just as human beings, he has placed his Spirit in us so that we can commune with him and within that understand him and hear his voice, but many of us are unable to. So I'm going to dive a little bit into that, but exercising discernment. So the reason why I say it in that way, exercising discernment instead of how to use discernment, is because when people say use discernment or just use discernment, or you gotta use discernment or something like that, I have a little bit of problem with that language, because there is such thing as human discernment, where it is something where you sit there and you ponder and you think blah blah blah, oh okay, this means this, or something like that. And then there's spiritual discernment, and spiritual discernment is actually a spirit. It's one of the 7 spirits of God mentioned in Revelations, and it's something that we all can have, but also God can bestow it on someone, and it can be edified, it can be sharpened. And as believers, we should strive to have it sharpened, but I digress. So when we talk about exercising discernment, or when someone says use discernment when we're talking about spiritual things, what they really mean is, well, they it's not wrong, but they kind of have it like a little bit wrong, in that it's not something you just can like pick up sometimes and then apply it. It's something that either God has bestowed upon you to have that spirit, or and you can ask, you can pray for that. You can pray for that. Discernment and wisdom go hand in hand. So, it says you can pray, you can ask anything, but, pray for wisdom and he gives graciously. Well, same thing with pretty much anything, but discernment as well. Excuse me. But yeah, so with discernment, it's a tool, a spiritual tool that has to be exercised, that has to be perfected, so to speak. So discernment, really, in definition, spiritually speaking, is to be able to exercise the mind of God, or pronounce the mind of God on a certain matter. And it goes hand in hand with prophecy and being prophetic and all that. But in general, it's something available to us all. So with that, if you're given two options, hypothetically, you should be able to go with the thing that this is of God, or say, okay, this is not of God, versus just, okay, I feel like this is good, or I think this is good, or something like that. That's more of like the human version of discernment. But the biblical version of it would be exercising God's mind on something. So, I hope that makes sense. Oh, and the whole name for the spirit of discernment is actually discernment of spirits. So within discernment, it's supposed to be that you can basically test the spirit and know, okay, this is God or of God. Like if it was a different way in which he speaks, the one of the many ways he speaks, or an angel or something like that. This is of God versus this is not. So discernment of spirits is actually what it's called. So and with this, you will also be able to hear and weigh God's voice a little bit better. If, like I was saying, wisdom and discernment go together, well, discernment and hearing God's voice go together as well. One thing about discernment, I think people don't understand, is that if I were to say something like, okay, well, that's not of God, or that is, or whatever, and it's like, well, how do you know that? They think that if they're totally carnal, whether they're Christian or not, they will think that I'm just thinking things on my own or feeling things. But what's actually going on, and what it is to walk with discernment, is you're actually doing like a little analysis in your mind of or a checklist, I suppose, in your mind of why this aligns with scripture, why this is the voice of God, or why it's not, and it's like several kind of things going on in your spirit, in your mind, to determine, is this actually of God? The way I like to think of it is kind of like a doctor who you're telling some symptoms to, and they're like, okay, it could be this, give me a little bit more. Okay, no, it's not that, never mind, it's this. Or it could be this, or whatever the case. Like they're doing a running like analysis or diagnosis of what potentially could be the ailment, right? Well, it's the same thing with discernment. It's like there's a running checklist, and that only comes from spending time with God. Like you will not be able to just make that up. You really can't. Not like if someone was to make it up, it'd be difficult to do, but if they were to, someone with discernment would be able to tell, like, okay, you're just saying stuff, sorry, but yeah. And I've seen that before. Normally, like, it's people who think that they are hearing from God, and it's not like they're just making it up, but they just don't know. Another thing with discernment is that it's a lot more like how I'm saying, like, it's like a checklist. There's a lot of weight to it. So when someone is saying something, it's like, not only am I doing that analysis I'm saying in my mind, but I guess maybe it's actually in my spirit, but not only am I doing that analysis, I'm able to detect why or why not what they're saying is of God or is not. And I'll come back to that point because it's really important. But number one of the ways to know is it the voice of God and exercise discernment is sacrifice. How much does it cost? So whenever God speaks, 9 times out of 10, well, if we're thinking about him speaking like instruction wise, it's gonna cost you. It's gonna cost you something. This is one thing that people probably don't like and don't consider, but this is one of the ways to know it's of God versus it's not very easily, is what sacrifice is demanded of you. Because doing the easy thing, the convenient thing, is most likely not God. I won't say with 100% certainty, but 95% plus, probably not God if he's instructing you. So there will be some sort of sacrifice, whether that sacrifice is money, time, comfort zone. Say he says go somewhere, physical labor, something like that. There will be some sort of sacrifice involved with God speaking. Most typically it'll just be faith. But when I say just be, actually that's kind of silly language, because it's a lot to have faith. I don't think people understand how much work is involved with faith. And typically within faith, there's more involved. Like within faith, there's time involved, right? With the sacrifice of time. Within faith, there may be fasting involved. There may be other sacrifices like involved with that. But the sacrifice of faith is a pretty big one. So keep that in mind whenever you're wondering, was that God, was that me, or you're listening to someone, does what they're saying, or actually that point makes more sense if it's you personally, because you won't know like how much they have to sacrifice or not. But I mean, I guess like, yeah, if someone's saying like, God told me this or God told me that, it's like, really? Like, he told you that? You don't really have to, that's obvious, So yeah, consider how much it's gonna cost you. Another thing to consider is, does it point you more towards God or away? If it's God's voice, it's always going to pull you closer to him. It's always going to pull you closer to him. And if it's not, it won't necessarily pull you away from him, but it probably will. Most likely will. This doesn't necessarily look like pull you away like in a very like bad way, like, oh, you're getting involved with this and that and like bad stuff, but like it could be sorry, I'm getting distracted. Hopefully you can't hear what's going on in the background, but anyways, if it pulls you away, it could look like just like you don't spend as much time with God as you used to, because now you have this in your life or that in your life. And it could even be, and oftentimes is, a blessing from God. Actually, seriously, normally God will bless you with something and you will find yourself with spending less time with him. Unfortunately, that's just kind of how it goes. But so it could be anything. Well, so obviously if that's the case, it came from God, but you're not handling it the way that you should. So that's not something that points you away from God, but it can be if you don't handle it right, if that makes sense. But this is really important if you're trying to discern, like listening to someone like a pastor or something like that. Does it point you more towards God or away? Because this is where a lot of people can get tripped up. They're like, oh, they're quoting scripture, oh, this, oh, that. But like at the end of it, where is your attention? Where's your focus? Is it, oh my gosh, that pastor's just so good, like, blah, 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 you know, nothing against, like, you know, someone being good, obviously, but, like, is it just about them? Because hopefully, the word that they shared was from the Spirit of God, so is it just about them, or is it about the word that's being shared? And is it pointing you more towards God? Sometimes we can make an idol out of things that seem godly. So it could be, some people actually, real talk, some people make an idol out of the Bible. And that might sound really weird. You might be like, how does that even work? Yeah, there are Christians who make an idol out of the Bible, meaning like, basically, if it's not in the text, it doesn't exist. Which, there's literal scriptures that talk about, you know, that can be a danger that people fall into. That was the danger that the Pharisees fell into. So you can make an idol out of the Bible. You can make an idol out of God's blessing. You can make an idol out of a pastor, blah, blah, blah. And so these things are obviously, they're not designed to point you away towards God, although if it is like a manipulative pastor or something like that, it could be that person or it could be you. So that's something that you would have to examine. A lot of discernment is examining. You have to be able to examine self. Oh, that's one point I forgot to mention. With discernment, you need to be able to discern your own spirit first and foremost, actually. That's an important note. Because if you don't know, like, your identity in Christ, and, like, if you can't discern your own spirit, and you can't discern, and that means, like, where you're at spiritually, and then in your maturity, but then also, like, just on a personal note, your weaknesses, your, what are they called, like, your pros and your cons, that kind of a thing, your discernment is going to be off. You need to be able to know that. And it's not like you'll know everything, like, all, like, at once. You continue to submit it to the Holy Spirit, and that will enlighten you, and that will help you exercise discernment better. Okay, so hopefully I made that point made sense. Does it point you more towards God or away? Could be an issue with the actual thing that's taking you away from God. It could be like, say you have a group of friends and you're going out a lot, and, you know, it's just like you're only spending time with them, or most of your time is with them or whatever, and it's hindering your time with God. For a lot of us, it's actually jobs. Obviously, jobs are not of the enemy, not of the devil, but they can become an idol. Actually, wow, I'm being convicted because that happened to me recently. But they can take you away from your time with God. So you have to weigh, you have to weigh these things. Another way to exercise discernment and hearing the voice of God is to ask yourself, would I reasonably think, feel, or do this thing? This doesn't always work, but most of the time when God speaks, it's not something that we ourselves would think of or feel or do. Now, this can get people into trouble. This could get some people into trouble because they may think, like, sometimes, I don't know, people think God's going to speak in some really sensational way. And it's like, sell all your possessions and go live on a mountain, blah, blah, blah. I mean, he might do that to you, but most likely he will not. And I'll come back to like that kind of example later. So you can consider if he is asking you to do a sacrifice, like on that level, like what that looks like. So another way to exercise discernment is to consider the peace, stillness, or rest that you have with what is being spoken. So we use these words interchangeably, I believe, and that's not actually correct. Peace and stillness and rest are different. Stillness and rest, I believe, are the same, but peace is different. To be honest, so going back to the point that I previously said, would I reasonably think, feel, or do this? Most of the time, if God's speaking, it won't be something that I would reasonably think, feel, or do on my own. So because of that, I don't necessarily have a peace when God speaks. There are times that he speaks through peace, or his words give peace, but there are times when it doesn't. Especially, and maybe more often actually than not, especially if it's like I need go talk to that person or go do something that's just totally outside my comfort zone. What ends up happening is I don't feel peace. It's like, no thanks, I pull a Jonah. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm good, God. So there is no peace. So if I were to use discernment and just say, do I have peace about it? Nope, don't have peace. Okay, nope, that's not him. Not correct. That's where you have to consider stillness or rest. I'm trying to think of how to describe the difference. But rest will occur even if there is no peace. If there's peace, there's also going to be rest and stillness. But rest and stillness can be there even if there is no peace, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to think of a biblical example. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I can't think of anything, but rest and stillness looks like, help me, Lord. It looks like you doing what God has told you to do. Even if it doesn't make sense and if it doesn't feel good. Peace usually will allow you to feel a level of like numbness to the pain, if that makes sense. So like within stillness and rest, you might still feel it. At least that's how I'm understanding this. Take everything I say back to God though. Don't take it, at face value. How I understand it is peace kind of calms you, and it's like, I don't know why I'm at peace, but I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything negative. I feel okay and I shouldn't. Stillness and rest. And the thing with rest is that it's something, whenever you listen to what the Lord has told you to do, you'll enter into what's called rest. So it's not it's something that you'll carry with you. So it's not something that, okay, I just have a peace about it. It's like, no, you may be in the pit for a while, you may be Joseph in prison for a while, but there's still a rest, because this is where God has ordained me to be. Now, you can have both of those things, stillness, rest, and peace going on simultaneously, but I believe them to also be separate. That's my understanding of that. Okay, moving on. Hopefully that made sense. God's voice sounds a lot like intuition. So I've been thinking about this a lot lately, but God's voice sounds most often like intuition, and intuition comes from God. But more often than not, that's what it will look and sound like. And I say this because, going back to the example of like some God speaking in some big sensational way, or even audibly, a lot of people think that that's how he'll, or some big thing, an angel suddenly appeared. Like, I mean, that can happen, but most likely it won't. More often than not, it will sound like your intuition, or what a lot of people call gut feeling, or something like that. And it's that is a knowing without any reasonable reason why you would or should know. So that's something to, if you ever feel that way, you should take a moment and pause and understand, why that was the way that you felt. Because most likely it was either your own spirit picking up something, or it was the voice of God. I've talked about this point a lot, but this is for yourself, but also for someone else. Like, if you're listening to someone else or ready to correct someone else, this is actually huge. God will point out error only to lift you. This is a really important point, because a lot of people will say a lot of people would say that's not God, or the opposite, like, oh yeah, that's God or whatever. But more often than not, I think people would dismiss that it is God. But the thing is, if you don't have an understanding as to why that is or isn't God, but for this example isn't God, then you actually need to be quiet. You do. This actually irritates me a lot, because people will say that, and my experience with God is that there's very little that he won't do. And it surprises me, some of the things that he says. It's like, you can even think like that, or feel that way or something, but it shouldn't. It really shouldn't. There's very few things that he won't say or do. Now, that's not to say that most of the time you think that it's God. It is. Well, it could be, but it's just one of those things you have to be careful with, because you can very easily dissuade or discourage someone, and actually it was God. It's just he spoke in a way that you yourself haven't experienced or aren't familiar with, and now you've discouraged someone else. This has happened to me a lot, to the point where it's hard for me to open up to people, to be honest. And another thing with, obviously examining the voice of God is, you should take time and not just like, oh, that was God, that was God, that was God. Like, actually review the situation. Take notes if you have to. Whatever the case is, spend time in his presence. And examine, like, okay, every time I hear this voice that speaks, and I don't mean audibly, but let's just say, I'm saying I experience this voice, and I do this, things go really, really wrong for me, That's an indication that it's not God. If you have been hearing from God but have literally zero results, there's a problem there. There's a major problem there. So what I share is not just coming from a like, oh yeah, like I've sat and considered this is God, this isn't God. Like, no, there's actual tangible results behind it. Like, if my prayers didn't get answers, if I wasn't able to pray for other people, see this, see that, have prophecy come true, have dreams come true, like, totally different thing. But to have that means that somewhere, I don't always get it right, but somewhere along the line, and more often than not, as it should be, this isn't a brag, but more often than not, I do get it right. That's not because I'm like some great, amazing person or anything like that. That's honestly how it should be. I should be able to hear from God, hear from him accurately and consistently, especially if I'm speaking to other people. So, about that. So, God will only point out error to lift you up. Please, people of God, please, 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 please stop just saying that's not God or something like that. Or, if you cannot give a reason as to why that is or isn't, then it's a call to humility in that moment. You can have your doubts or whatever the case is, but it's crazy because it's like, okay, that's not God, so then what would God's mind be on that? That's what I think I'm going to say the next time someone discounts me. Because, look, if you're actually in the wrong, if I'm actually in the wrong, and I'm like, God told me this, blah, 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 I want to be corrected. I want to be put on the right path, because if I'm going down a path that I think is God, and I'm wrong, well, God works all things together for the good of those who love him, so he will put me on the right path. Great. But it'd be better to minimize me being wrong. It'd be better to just get it right in the first place. And I don't, and I want to be corrected, but I want to be corrected by the Spirit of God. By not just because you have never experienced God speaking to you in that way. That's your own thing. So that's a really, really important point. When you're listening to others and when you're speaking to others. Another thing to consider with exercising discernment: the more time you spend with God, easier it will be to hear his voice. Another point I put was God has spoken to us all, but I can just combine those two because he has, and he speaks often. Some people say, like, you can have a daily appointment with God, and I don't know if I'm quite there yet, but you can. You'd be surprised if you shut off the TV, give yourself some quiet time with him in the word, whatever, in prayer, whatever. You'll be surprised. The more you give, the more you'll get, basically. And you'll start to see and hear him speak in ways that you didn't even know that he could. We're limited. He's not. So, when it comes, like I was saying at the beginning, with exercising discernment, you have to exercise it. You have to, continually kind of surrender yourself to his spirit in order for you to really hone in on what it is to exercise discernment. And then this last little point is that God's voice can be ignored, but it will be difficult to ignore him. It will be difficult to ignore him. Now, what do I mean by this? Again, some people think that, well, God doesn't speak, or, if he's not speaking in this very loud, magnificent way, he's not speaking, and that's not correct. He can speak in vision, he can speak audibly, he can speak in great ways, but more often than not, that's not how you're going to hear from him. And I don't know, I just feel like people think like, oh, if it's God, like, I'll know. But no, you can actually ignore the voice of God. You can either just not hear from him, which is just you ignoring him, because he speaks to us all. It's just a matter of, are you able to pick up on it or not? Pick up on that frequency. Or you can hear him, capture it, but not like recognize that it's him, So, when it comes to exercising discernment, know that, you might say, well, say you're going through something, you're in a situation, it's like, well, God hasn't spoken to me yet, blah, 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 or whatever. Discernment would come in handy where you review, like, okay, well, maybe he hasn't spoken in the way that I want or that I'm used to, but I do keep having this deep down, like, almost intuitive feeling that I should do this or I shouldn't do this or something like that. His voice can be ignored, especially if he's speaking to you in a new way. And if you're serious about like your walk in hearing from God, it will actually be difficult to ignore him. One of the things that I've said that will help you know if it's God or not is it'll shake you up a little bit. Maybe not like tremendously, like you fall on your knees, blah blah blah, but it will kind of, oh, was that God? You'll have that kind of a moment. The more you give yourself to it, I should say. At first, probably not. When I look at how the Lord has graced me to hear from him, I remember, so what are we in, 2026? In 2020, I was in such a different place, and I was like, I was in such a different place, and I definitely thought like, oh, he's not speaking to me anymore and all this kind of stuff. Now, there are times that he can be silent, but even in his silence, he's saying something. I think I did a video on that, but if I didn't and someone needs some notes on that, let me know. Because that's actually really, that's its own lesson, is God's silence and what he's actually saying in that. So, one last little thing I said that I would talk about is, if God is asking you to do some magnificent thing, give away, empty your bank account, or you're going to go through a season of homelessness or something like that. Really grand things, you need to have discernment in place to determine if that's actually him or not, because a lot of people mess up with that, and they do, just like they expect him to, they expect to hear from him in a really grand way. a lot of people also expect to do really grand things, or they get what is it called? They get swept up in the idea that it's like, I have to do these huge displays to show that, God is actually speaking to me or whatever. Now, there are times when he has even biblically asked, for huge sacrifices, Abraham, for instance, sacrificing his son. But more often than not, if that's the case, or if you think that might be the case, actually I should say, you really have to weigh where you're at spiritually, what God has spoken to you, what else he's spoken to you, your maturity, those kind of things. Other things probably too. You have to pray about that, though. You have to pray about it and see, is this really what he's asking of me? Because most people aren't going to be like, okay, cool, yeah, whatever, if they're actually hearing from God. I mean, he can ask much less, and it can still be a little bit like, do I have to do this, Lord? I absolutely have to. So definitely, if he's asking you to like empty your bank account or something like dramatic like that. And I say that because there are people who actually have done that, and God has spoken to them, and then that was the sacrifice needed for God to bless them. But there's other people who've done it and thought that it was God and ended up broke because God didn't tell them that. We have this idea that, I don't know, I think sometimes we think that, if God didn't say it, like, it won't happen or something like that. Like, I'll be okay. And actually, you will be okay, but for a little bit, you may not be. Because his grace is when he speaks. His grace actually, let me correct that. His grace is beyond him speaking, but when he speaks, there is additional grace there. But if you do something that he didn't ask you to do, or believe something that he didn't authorize for you to believe or whatever, he's not going to stop you. And this is important with, I've seen people who, it's like, they just kind of assume that God spoke. I had a friend who it was like that. Like, she was in a situation and she just, I believe that God told me, blah, 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 whatever. And it's like, okay, and why do you believe this? Like, why did you believe it was from God? Oh, because, it was like this really peaceful situation, and things just came together, blah, blah, blah. So those are good things. Those are good considerations, but that's not the only considerations to be had. Because the enemy can also use those things too. The enemy can absolutely use those things too. So if you think that, that's you, like God is, calling you to do something grand like that, I would definitely be in prayer about it. Whatever that big thing is, it doesn't have to be the money thing, but just whatever it is. I'd be in prayer about it. I'd ask other people also to pray for me if you feel comfortable to open up. Hopefully you do if he's calling you to that. Because if he's calling you to do something like that, there's a reason why. And you have to consider, so you have to consider where you're at spiritually. You have to consider where he's taking you. If, he's not going to give you all the picture, but okay, he's calling you to give away all your money. Why, though? Has he spoken any blessing about, or anything about wanting to bless you financially? Because if he wants to bless you financially, if he's spoken that, yes, you will absolutely go through, I'm not saying empty your bank account, but you will go through a testing. Whatever God speaks over you, you're going to go through the opposite, if that makes sense. So like, if he's promised you this or that, shown you, I'm going to take you here, I'm going to take you there. Think about Abraham, for instance. I'm going to give you a son. Okay, well, he's like almost dead and he doesn't have anything. And the years go on and he doesn't have anything. Like, what, God? So it's always the opposite. So you have to consider those things. It's not just going to be, okay, just give me all your money, God says, because I want to test your faith. I'm not saying that he can't say that, but most likely, if it's just a test of faith, most likely not. I actually heard a story, this is the last thing I'm going to say, of a lady who, what was it? It was like she kept going to a bus stop at like 3 a.m. believing that it was God, and it was actually a seducing spirit. It was actually the enemy. And it talks about that in scripture. I think it's like in Timothy or something, like seducing spirits. But that's a thing that happens too. You can hear from the Lord, and then the enemy will also speak. So you are hearing from the Lord, but not entirely, and that should be a very big concern. If people understood what it is to carry the weight of God's voice, you will also be that much more cautious in general, but cautious with hearing from the enemy and thinking it's God, or hearing your own thoughts and thinking it's God, because that will happen. There is no way around it. It will happen. I used to beat myself up over that a lot. And it, like, if I never broke out of that, actually it was pride that I didn't even realize I had. But if I never broken out of that, I would have ended up never just, burning out before I even started, because you are going to make that mistake. It is going to happen. So you have to be prepared for that. And it's a learning thing. It's a chance to grow. It's not a chance to just put yourself down, or a place to put yourself down. So I hope this helped with exercising discernment and understanding the voice of God. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know. Bye!